Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Randy Bach, and today is April 6, 2022, and we're having a coronavirus conversation, presuming you are having a conversation with me, or otherwise it's just a coronavirus monologue, which is okay for a point. Um, we've been doing these going on 2 years now, and there's a lot to cover. There's nothing particularly kind of brewing up on the COVID front, um, but I'll just, maybe put this out as a bit of a video diary so future selves, including myself, can come back and look at this and see where we were as of April 2022, full 2 years and more after, 14 days to slow the spread. People have probably forgotten what that meant. That was so we don't overburden the hospitals, which never really, outside of Queens, New York, just one borough within New York City, never really got overwhelmed in the United States. This is a worldwide virus, and it's always been a little bit funny or odd to me that a good fraction of the world doesn't seem really to be affected by this, or they don't post it. Um, Back going to medical school days, and shortly thereafter, I remember hearing and reading a study that said, um, I can't tell you the veracity of it. It's before the internet. I can't find it now. Um, that the complaint of sciatica, lumbar, or back pain was not really a thing in vast parts of sub-Saharan Africa. Um, that nobody really left work because of it. Nobody complained of it. It wasn't a diagnosis. Here we had a lot of car insurance and workman's comp, and people had back pain. They stayed out of work. When you didn't have the system to kind of support that, there was far less of it apparently, and it wasn't really a term of art. I'm sure people got pains, but they didn't really have it classified and qualified and quantified in the same way as we did here, and it didn't necessarily yield um, um, kind of the financial benefits for the individual and or the treating physicians. At a certain point, I'm old enough to remember when there really were no chiropractors around, and leaving aside whether chiropractic is a thing, valid or not, I personally think it can help people feel better, but I don't think it's really validated by scientific data the same way allopathic medicine is. Those with us with an MD, the various hospitals and so forth. But there was a thing called what is it? No fault collision, kind of like no fault divorce. I think it was in the 70s or early 80s, maybe the late 70s, that it was decided that accidents would be easier to adjudicate if nobody had to determine fault. So early on in my life, there was an accident and somebody was at fault, and that person had to pay for the other person's problems. So if two people got in an accident, I kind of look, I don't know, gazing in the newspaper, and I zip through the stop sign and hit somebody. The insurance, I mean, presuming I have insurance or either by myself, I'm responsible for the injuries, that person's and mine. Then the New York State Legislature, I think, came up with it first that it would be easier to get rid of all the problems, the lawyers, the litigation, and make life easier, move along smoothly when they got rid of fault. And lo and behold, anybody could sue regardless. I mean, I hit you, I have back pain, I go to my doctors, I get paid by car insurance, so it doesn't come out of my pocket. Whereas previously it would have if I had been at fault. Well, guess what happened? I mean, it just magnified the numbers of people complaining of various, whiplash, neck pain, back pain, all that kind of stuff from car accidents. So then they said, oh, you know what? We're going to solve that. We're going to come up with something that's really going to make it hard to get. We're going to get rid of all the kind of frivolous claims. We're going to have a $2,000. What is it? I think it was not a deductible per se. It was a $2,000 minimum for a claim to be considered worthy of having litigation thereafter. And that was really from what I understand, what I've seen, that was the coincidence and probably the cause of the huge growth in physical therapists and chiropractors across the land. Why is that? Well, because physicians would see you now and then, maybe once a week, maybe once a month or something like that. And you wouldn't, at the time, from $50 to $100 medical visits back in the ancient days when that was a lot of money. You wouldn't garner 2,000, so they thought it was a lot. Well, the physical therapists and chiropractors, they would see you every single day, and this was let's call it intentional, and they would get up a $2,000 bill, like boom, like that. So everybody who wanted to get the bigger jackpot of potential, larger claims, 50,000, $100,000 injuries, pain and suffering, all that kind of stuff, missing work, that, well, let's say the eager, the opportunistic, and potentially some of the malfeasant, they would jump on and go the chiropractor physical therapist route, and boom, they ipso facto, snap your fingers, presto magico, they would have $2,000 claim. Then everybody, all of a sudden, everybody had that. And as a physician, I remember people coming in and they wanted me to write them a referral, or send them to a physical therapist right away when they had a car accident. They'd come in walking fine, and I would, why don't we wait and see on this? It's like, well, I had an accident. And the cars, I would oftentimes see the car right, they'd driven up into the parking lot and so forth. And, nothing was really that far amiss. I mean, if you watch the NFL, I'm not saying everyone should go through damage like that, but, for the most part, people can take a fair amount of pounding and still get up. And even if they have some bruises, it's not necessarily anything much to do about them. But, they were off to the races. The only point here is that the industry somewhat followed the public law, and in a sense the way that these things were framed. So it's hugely not uncommon these days to have a claim. You kind of a workman's comp claim, you can have a car accident claim, and you're kind of off to the races, working on your payout. Well, I see this as, in a sense, kind of the pollution of medicine, the pollution of science, and probably it's always been this way, with various kind of externalities that are going to influence the way you handle things. I hugely respected a neurologist, Dr. Martin Samuels. I think he's still around. I think he's retired. He was at Harvard teaching hospitals, Martin Samuels. And another doctor had said this at an earlier point in University of Rochester Medical School, that a lot of people's pains won't go away till they have felt that they personally have exhausted every avenue for litigation, retribution, and collection. And so that's not to say everyone is kind of a malingerer or working up their pain, but there's this kind of doubt in your mind, and maybe I feel a little bit of pain, and there's a chance I can get some reward for this pain. So we have secondary gain, and that skews the whole system of rewards. If you go back to the African example, people are working a daily wage. If they're not up and around and getting with it, they're not going to have their daily wage. They don't have their daily wage, absent saving account and all that kind of stuff, a more primitive kind of way of being, say 50, 60 years ago. They weren't going to eat. Their family wasn't going to eat. So it was kind of like grin and bear it, get up and do things. Now, is that the right way to do it? I don't know, but not necessarily our way is better. And we're going to maybe point out some of the oddities in the numbers here, and say in sub-Saharan Africa. COVID, you never hear. You hear about the India strain. There is the South Africa strain, which is kind of the more advanced, kind of richer, although it's having some issues lately, residually wealthier part of sub-Saharan Africa. But outside of that, you don't really hear very much, from Uganda, Nigeria, Congo, and so forth about COVID. I certainly haven't. And I've been following this on a regular basis. What's up with that? Well, there's a very low vaccination rate, probably 10% or less. I think Nigeria is one of the more organized places in that part of the world. And I think even right now they have a vaccination rate of about 10%. But nobody's hearing anything much about COVID problems there. I don't know if I haven't really researched whether they wear masks, or whether they make their kids wear masks, and do all kinds of things that we do. But presumably it's the same virion, same virus, and why aren't they having problems with it? Maybe they're just not going nuts over it. Maybe they don't have the money to do testing all the time. A lot of what we're seeing with COVID is the fact that we do a test on every single hospital patient. Every time you go to school, every time you do this, every time you get on an airplane, we're doing testing. And when you do a lot of testing, you're going to get stuff. You're going to get answers, and they're not always necessarily clinically significant. So we have to kind of parse that out and figure out whether a positive test means that much. If we did a test for uric acid, or a test of I don't know, some C-reactive protein on every single person all the time, every time they enter a school, every time they enter a gym, every time they enter an airplane, and then tried to figure out what happened afterwards, you'd get a lot of, I think, false positives pertaining to that particular index of whatever you decided to measure. You'd say, oh my God, gout is really horrible, or C-reactive protein really coincides with a lot of people with chest pain and all this kind of stuff. It doesn't necessarily mean it was cause and effect. A lot of times, just things are there together. And the fact that we're testing coronavirus like crazy, who knows what that means? And as I've said many, many times, coronavirus has been around humans probably, forever and a half. And as a common cold, 1 out of 5 common colds represent coronavirus. So, a lot of this is just kind of like life going on, and what we're calling Omicron and this and that may just be kind of recurrent coronavirus, common cold type things. So, we see that reflected in the numbers. Anyway, so there's that. I'm going to go over that. And I also want to talk about um, a letter slash article that I'm writing. I think it's going to be published. It was held back for publication this week based on a few edits. I hope I can get it out next week. I'm going to leave that up in the air, but I'm going to maybe read some parts of it because I think it has peripherally to do with some vaccine stuff. I'll see if I get to it. So let's just kind of, I mean, there's a lot of stuff here, and I haven't, completely read every inch of everything, but these are just some things that interested me along the way in the world of COVID this week. And let's see if I can share with you. Let's see, here we are. Maybe I'll just do this full screen. So this is from the Wall Street Journal. I was reading over the weekend. Shanghai workers sleep at the office as China extends COVID-19 lockdown. So there are places, again, they tend to be the more built up parts of society around the world that are having COVID problems. And I don't know if they're really getting the same level of sickness. If this is in fact a hard problem in China right now, arguably it would be because they spent so much time ignoring it and trying to clamp it down and make it not exist in the beginning, that they didn't build up herd immunity. I don't know. I think the vaccine in large part is somewhat of an irrelevancy, as the virus itself has mutated away from the original COVID-19 strain. So when they say COVID-19 here, I don't know if they really are still getting the ancestral version. That's an interesting thing, but it's like it's an interesting point to see what they're willing to do to kind of keep working. So here, work is in China, work is kind of the thing, and they have much more authoritarian society, and so they're going to do COVID with staying at work instead of locking down at home. They're going to be locking you down at work. I don't know how you'd feel about that, but it's certainly a different way of looking at things. What else do we have here? A similar article in the Wall Street Journal. Maybe this is the same exact article in the Wall Street Journal, is it? Okay, we're going to probably move on from this. I'm not going to give you any more Wall Street Journal for right now. There's just a lot of funky stuff going on. This is an article here from Israel. This was pulled down from, I guess, their social media in Israel. This is, I guess, health minister or and our member of the committee on figuring out whether people should be wearing masks still in April 2022 in the single most multiply vaccinated country on earth. I think the United Arab Emirates has a higher percentage of people vaccinated, but Israel has probably had more total doses because they've somewhat been in bed with Pfizer along the way, and they're getting it wholesale, as it were. So I don't have her name here, but it's part of this video, and she apparently was the only person to show up at this meeting. Given the fact that I'm here alone, I am in favor. No one is against. No one abstains. This was the committee as a whole. I guess she's over here on the lower right, and nobody else decided to show up. I don't know why. She's not wearing a mask. She voted that everyone should keep wearing masks. These are pictures of her, I guess, as we go on in this article, this movie, I guess. That's a kid still wearing a mask. And I guess her name was Alina Bardek Yalov. And here she is at various functions not wearing masks. I'm not going to stop the video at every single point, but if people didn't have double standards, they might not have any standards at all. I'm going to, I guess, go around the world and show you a little bit what's going on with COVID today. Just for the matter of record, the current variant strain in the United States, this is purple is Omicron. Now we got some, slightly different Omicron. I think this is 21K or 21L. I think it's kind of a distinction without a difference. The UK is doing the same thing. They've kind of eliminated all of their masking requirements and so forth. But these purplish Omicron strains are going around. The original, more dangerous ones are gone. And so I don't think there's much to worry about. How do I know it's not much to worry about it? Well, here's the moving average case fatality rate for COVID-19. So this is worldwide. There's a hugely low case fatality rate. And they're doing a lot of testing. The testing is skewed towards the elderly and sick because they're in facilities more often, hospitals, nursing homes. They probably get tested a lot, and so they're going to find a lot of COVID. And even so, the fatality rate is exceedingly low. This is about 0.2%. And again, I think it's much lower when you look at cases as a whole. Of people, actually having symptoms over who don't necessarily get themselves COVID tested, because again, you're skewing towards the more sick portions of your population. Getting back to Israel, this is again the most multiply vaccinated place on earth. They are not doing better than Sweden. They have almost the identical population, and they're probably doing about the same in deaths as Sweden. You should have, in a country this size, about 300 deaths per day in general. And so these are very low numbers overall. They're averaging here, maybe 10 to 20 deaths. And these are people with COVID tests, but that doesn't necessarily mean very much. The number of cases has gone up astronomically, and so the case fatality rate is low. And I think a lot of this is just coincident testing as before. You see the same thing in the UK. That the fatality rate is very low. The UK, I think, has close to 60 million people, something of that sort. So they should have a death, let's say 6 times, about 1,800 people a day dying. And so they're here very low numbers, 70, 80, whatever, 200 and so forth. So I think it's, pretty much gone. But on the other hand, people are not taking away the emergency status and maybe leaving in reserve in case there's some election issues and so forth, in which case you might want to get back to emergency statutes, mail-in ballots, that kind of stuff, whatever it is. I think a lot of this has been used and manipulated. India is very low vaccination rate, very low death rate. They had high case numbers. Again, that would imply the case fatality rate is very low. Similar in the United States. I'm not going to go through all this, I guess. The one I did want to show is Sweden, which did none of the lockdowns, basically, and they've had a little blip of Omicron cases and very low numbers of deaths. I think Sweden's got about 10 million people. So here you're talking about, a few dozens of deaths, and in a place where they'd have 300 deaths per day anyway. And they did this without any of the, craziness that we did in other parts of the world. There's a map here. I can't seem to make it larger, so I apologize. But if you look in here, these little dots are number of cases. Africa's got a lot of people. I think there's probably about a billion people in Africa. And so more than North America, probably more than North and South America together, and very few little blips here. I think this is a matter, for the most part, of under testing and not caring and having bigger problems like general starvation, crime, war, civil strife, all that kind of stuff. So when you have other things on your plate, for instance, like the Ukraine has, taken over a lot of our imaginations and conceptions and urgings and so forth, and we don't care quite as much about COVID. What else? I think that's pretty much it for the countries. I'm just going to go over, briefly, just a few articles, and then I'm going to come back to my own article and maybe end with that. These are just some things that I'd like to maybe share with you. This is not really a COVID item here. This is, the Hunter Biden biofirm partnered with Ukrainian research isolating deadly pathogens using funds from the Obama's Defense Department. I only bring this up because there's a coincidence of public health issues and politics. Cronyism goes where the money is. And there's a lot of money in public health, and public health can kind of wave its wand very quickly and determine the way you have to look at things, the way you have to do things, the way you have to spend your money. And it's a very easy, kind of leverage point to get power, money, and wealth, as we've seen with Pfizer and Moderna, making everybody do this and having it all paid and with no liability. It's kind of nice work if you can get it, and you can get it if you try. This is not related to Zika per se. But I just bring this up because if you think public health is only about health, it's also about politics. So WHO demands an end to all time limits on abortions. Not only that, but they want to be able to get rid of laws preventing terminations at any point. Otherwise, risk violating the rights of women, girls, or other pregnant persons. So here's the category of people who might get pregnant: women, girls, or other. So this has nothing to do with COVID, but um, it also doesn't have much to do with health. I mean, it's arguable whether, I think it's not great for the health of the baby, aka fetus, to demand, let the abortion happen at any point. And here you're talking about some kind of vogue politics. I don't think this necessarily flies in Iran, Afghanistan, India, China, a lot of places that are not on the kind of vogue terminology that Europe seems to be on, and the United States and whatnot. So there you have it. Without zipping around too much, Kyrie Irving is back playing basketball. What changed? Nothing except politics. And the Nets are ostensibly in the playoffs, and the Knicks are not. So New York has only one team left, and essentially the mayor of New York caved on this. I don't think they caved enough because they still have masks for kids outdoors. This is lunacy. There's some articles I'll just leave some links for that I find interesting. This is why anger towards the unvaccinated was internal psychological manipulation. So this is kind of a long read, and he's looking at a study from 2020. I think it's well worth your time, and I will leave a link to this. What are the other ones? Well, I think I'm going to pass on. Well, I guess there are a couple here. Where were we? I think I'm going to pass on some of the other ones for now. There are some always interesting articles out. Maybe I'll just leave them in the comments section. Here's something I wanted to read. This is my own work, and it's about vaccines, and I have it annotated here. But it's Zika is very human challenge. So this isn't COVID. Zika was the last great pandemic, which roiled Brazil in 2015, 2016, and ostensibly caused small heads in babies. And so back in 2015, viral, well, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically the point here is that we are actually engaging right now in infecting people with Zika in the United States. This is called a human challenge trial, and the NIAID, part of the NIH, and the CDC made an ethics panel in 2016, which gave an answer in 2017 about this specific topic, a human challenge trial for Zika. So what is that? That's like, well, they want to, if in fact you had to test the vaccine, would you / should you infect people with Zika if you don't have enough people in the population who already have Zika, so you compare whether the vaccine worked or not? So it's kind of like if I had a special great umbrella, but it's not raining, how am I going to know if the umbrella really works? Or if I got these new boots or a winter coat and there's no winter around, how am I going to tell? Well, I could artificially, freeze the room down to, minus 20 degrees and check if my coat works. Well, fine. But here you're talking about infecting people with Zika. Now, if Zika is a bad enough bug, then you probably shouldn't be infecting people with it. And if it's not a bad enough bug, then why are you going to be infecting people to go for a vaccine when Zika itself has disappeared? The odd thing is that this hasn't really been covered in the news anywhere. We had there's an article, I think I quote here, from 2018 in Science magazine. Where is it? If I can find it fast enough. I think this one here. So as, well, I guess I'm getting locked out. As massive Zika vaccine trial struggles, researchers revive plan to intentionally infect people with Zika. So the disappearance of Zika made it tough for the $110 million NIAID funded US studies to do. to perform. So lo and behold, what are they going to do? Um, they're going to go out and infect people. Well, this was a trial balloon, and they ran to change metaphors. They flag up the flagpole, and nobody saluted. Brazil has kind of its FDA called Anvisa, and they said no, even though Dr. Fauci at the time was pressing for this. Despite his own ethics panel having demurred or refused to give, kind of its imprimatur to um, a human challenge trial. He wanted to go ahead with it 2 years later anyway, because I don't know, because money, because the $110 million, because they want to spend it. They don't get to use it unless they do something with it. Researchers like to get paid. There's more staff, more this, more power, more ways to shell out the money. I mean, that's a fair chunk of change. This is out of like a $500 million that was devoted to the Zika vaccine in general. And there was no, 6 years later, we have no vaccine. So I think, they're feeling a little bit guilty, or what I call here this paragraph here, but NIAID's $110 million trial put researchers into sunk cost fallacy mode, choosing lucrative action over frugal caution. Dr. Fauci endorsed a Brazilian HCT, human challenge trial, 2 years after Zika's complete disappearance. Now he knows vaccine data will keep. There was no urgency, yet he greenlit what we call the Tuskegee option. Tuskegee and Guatemala were both syphilis tests that were done and kept on too long at the danger of watching people get too ill and die unnecessarily, so that researchers could see the diagnostic pathway. The ethicists in this case for Zika had concluded that Zika was non-fatal, and avoidable, and in no way, the equivalent of epidemiologic war. So we didn't have to pull out all the stops, and yet apparently after Brazil turned down, I think wisely, because the jury's out whether Zika microcephaly was real, given that it showed up only once, never showed up again, and dengue, its cousin, is there all the time and never causes microcephaly. So Zika and dengue are essentially almost identical bugs, but Zika is kind of the harmless cousin of Zika. And so there's a lot of questions. The WHO itself had questions, in January of 2016, whether this was a real connection, but there was a lot of political pressure, if I'm repeating myself, that kind of goes into the public health mechanism about what things they should say and when and how. And a lot of times they err on the side of emergency and fright, and there you have it. So we spent $1 billion to kind of fund Zika research and Zika vaccine and so forth in 2016, but that was already when Zika was tailing off, and we didn't necessarily know the degree of science that was coming out of Brazil. And let me cut to the chase, it wasn't that great. So I do have a book out now called Overturning Zika. You can find it on Kindle, and maybe I'll show a link to that as well. I recommend you buy it, because it'll make me, $9 or $10 wealthier, which is always a great thing. But I think it's a really fascinating look at the public health mechanism and how it fails sometimes to do exactly the right thing. And there's a lot of politics in public health. So there you have it for today. So we're clocking in a half hour. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to cover. I don't know if I did an adequate job today. Maybe I'll just leave with a few anecdotes just from regular daily life. I'm pretty social being, and so I go out and about. I own some property in a local town, and I went to a political fundraiser, and it's kind of a blue collar town. So I also go to Boston. I've been in and out of Boston a fair amount. I think on a previous episode, I mentioned that I'd gone to the Live Theater. There was the Lyric Theater in Boston. It's right kind of downtown / Back Bay. Nice spot, an interesting show, sort of. It wasn't a great show, but they made us, everybody, all vaccinated. Everybody vaccinated. I had to show the vaccination card. They made everyone wear a mask, and they had mask patrols. And in different parts of the show, which is supposed to represent Shakespeare's time, they had people come out with scrolls like the town crier and tell everyone to put their masks on. It was just a total break in the kind of the suspension of disbelief that you need to go to the theater. And I tried to make it as a chin bra a lot of times, but they had a patrol person coming around, and with the lights half on, I guess intermission or whatever, she Invasion of the Body Snatcher pointed me out and told me to put it on right now, full face. And No, I was sitting far away from. I was sitting kind of in the back, purposefully, easily 4 or 5 seats from anybody else, and all by my lonesomes. Socially distanced and vaccinated, and with a card and all that kind of stuff. And that wasn't good enough. So I said, you know what, I'm going to take a hard pass on this thing, and I didn't stick around for the rest of the show. My wife and her friend and our friend did. Uh, you know, I I don't know. I was the only one who left ceremoniously or unceremoniously. But there you have it. That's Boston. So in the next town over, practically, kind of more blue collarish, I was at a political event last week, and it was super awesome. We was at a hotel, a ballroom, and people were far closer than they were in the theater in Boston, and everyone's milling around, and it was so 2019 or 2018. People were having a great time. They were enjoying each other, patting each other on the back, and no mask, not a single mask to be found, not a single mask. And it's just amazing. You think that people would that this I mean, it's not as if this is some other planet, some other continent, some other country, some other state. These are towns like a mile or two away from each other, and the difference is vast. And uh, it's inexplicable. So what you tend to see is just kind of weird social configurations. Obviously, still now, if you go to many hospitals, doctors' offices, people are all masked up. I watched the basketball games, and our Celtics coach apparently is a reasonable coach. I think it's first year, Udoka. Udoka, he's from Nigeria originally by family heritage, but he does this weird thing where for his pregame interview, uh, he's got a full mask on, so he's muffled. You can't understand him. And then during the game, he's either got it completely gone, he's close up to people talking right in their face, or the refs and everything like that. And other times he's not near anybody, he's wearing a mask. And sometimes he'll wear a chin bra for good lengths of time. Nonsensical. And I've kind of mentally kind of mapped it, because I'm watching the game anyway, and you watch enough of them, you get repetition of the different. And independent of where he is, whether it's home or away, whether independent of what time of the game, there's no rhyme or reason. It just kind of seems like sometimes it's in his pocket, I guess, and sometimes he's wearing it on one ear, sometimes under the chin, sometimes over and it could be in the fourth quarter he decides to put it back on again. Tell me if this makes any sense. I don't see it. And you know I have a professor friend at one of the state colleges, and um, they've finally taken away the mask mandate there, but people are still wearing masks. A lot of the young students are still wearing them. They're terrified. I belong to a couple different gyms, and one of them is a tennis out in kind of a tennis pavilion. And this seems to go a little bit ethnically. There's a lot of kind of first generation Chinese Americans there, and they have kind of a Chinese fan dance class, and then they have a lot of swimmers and so forth, and huge numbers always wearing the mask. I suppose they don't wear it in the water swimming, but every other moment, and the kids are dancing with masks, and they're sitting in the waiting room, and kind of like your more ancestrally generated Americans, less so. At any rate, there's a lot of it. I have no idea why young people are doing it. I assume it has to do with kind of the social thing, but go figure. I don't think it has much to do with the science. I think we're going to be finding a lot of this thing falls away, as this kind of scales fall from people's eyes. Um, I enjoyed talking with you tonight. Please share this. Please give me advice and thoughts about how we might improve the show, and things you'd like to see, hear about. And again, so my promotion is, please go check out my book, Overturning Zika. Overturning Zika, Zika. It's on Amazon. I'm going to have different editions coming out. I'm going to be hopefully having a Zika comic book, and a graphic novel on the same topic of what went wrong, possibly with some of the initial science. And some interesting stuff there. Anyway, thank you for tuning in, and look forward to seeing you next week. Have a good night.